Stop everything you're doing right now. Behind the stained glass, the sacred chants, and the prayers lies a truth carved in blood. For centuries, the world's greatest religions promised salvation. But what if I told you that some of their holiest victories were won through slaughter, and the light of heaven was built on the ashes of the fallen? Today, we open the pages history tried to seal shut, the 10 bloodiest and darkest chapters of world religion. Every religion speaks of peace, compassion, and redemption. Yet in the shadow of their temples, history whispers another story. Crusades, inquisitions, holy wars, massacres in the name of purity. Carl Jung once said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow." Faith can inspire saints, but when it becomes absolute, it can justify the sword. And in the long history of belief, blood has been spilled, not despite faith, but because of it. Picture this: Jerusalem, July 1099. The city gates buckle beneath siege towers, splintering into ruin. The air is thick with the rot of unburied corpses from weeks of starvation. Waste and blood seep into the dust, mixing into a stench that clings to your skin. Through the breach, they come an unending tide of armored knights, their banners marked with the blood-red cross of Christ. Behind them, priests in white robes walk steadily, lips murmuring blessings not for peace, but for slaughter. Swords are raised, kissed by holy water, and anointed with the promise of paradise. Every strike is no longer just war, it is worship. The killing is not chaos, it is discipline. Street by street, door by door, the Crusaders move like a tide of iron. Fires are lit in homes with families still inside. The cries are muffled beneath the hymn of Te Deum Laudamus, sung without hesitation. In temple courtyards, prisoners kneel in long rows, heads bowed in prayer before the blade. One by one, they fall. Their bodies are kicked aside to make space for the next. Chroniclers claim that in the Temple of Solomon, blood reached the knees of the conquerors. Some doubt the detail, but the survivors swore it was true. No one is spared. Muslims, Jews, even Eastern Christians, all marked as infidels. Those who rush to churches seeking sanctuary find them already filled with corpses. And above it all, a single cry echoes through the city: Deus vult, God wills it. And here lies the most chilling truth. This was not killing in spite of faith. This was killing because of faith. In the theology of the crusade, the blood of the unbeliever was a bridge to heaven. Murder was not a sin to be forgiven. It was a deed to be rewarded. Think about that transaction. You kill, and in return, your own sins vanish. Your soul is not stained, it is washed clean. Paradise becomes a currency, bought with human lives. In this economy of salvation, the cross ceased to be a symbol of sacrifice. It became a seal of holy entitlement. The crusade was not simply a war for holy land. It was a marketplace of blood, where redemption had a price, and that price was death. And here's the question you cannot unhear. If paradise can be purchased with corpses, what does that say about the paradise itself? Dawn breaks, and the first light glints off the arcs of curved blades raised high by mounted riders. The crescent banners snap in the wind like a storm front on the horizon. Over the dunes, the call to prayer drifts across the sand. But this morning, It is not an invitation to kneel. It is a summons to march, to fight, to carry God's will on the edge of a sword. The assaults begin at the break of day. In the heat, the cavalry thunders forward, kicking up a wall of dust. Arrows streak the sky, finding their way into the hearts of defenders on the walls. The gates are battered with heavy timbers until the hinges tear loose. The first wave pours in a disciplined tide of men who believe the ground they tread is already sanctified by heaven. Streets become rivers of chaos. Roofs of palm and reed catch fire, collapsing in a rain of embers that traps families inside. Merchants fall beside their stalls, their goods crushed into the blood-soaked earth. The air burns with the stench of grain, flesh, and ash. The conquerors present their terms quickly. Recite the Shahada. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger, and live under the protection of the Caliph. Refuse, and the verdict is immediate. Some kneel in trembling obedience, their voices stumbling over the foreign words. Others bid defiance and are cut down where they stand. When the killing ends, the aftermath begins. The spoils are divided: gold, livestock, weapons, and people. Women and children are bound together with rope, marched toward markets hundreds of miles away. Men of skill are spared for labor. Others vanish into the desert caravans. The mosques rise quickly, sometimes built on the very stones of the temples they replace. Chroniclers of the Caliphate record these campaigns as divine victories, the spread of Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, across continents. In this order, the Caliph is more than a ruler. He is the living shadow of God's will. To resist him is to resist heaven itself. And here lies the enduring danger. When faith and state fuse into a single authority, every border becomes holy ground. Every dispute is framed as a test of loyalty to God. The battlefield becomes the courtroom. The verdict is rendered in steel. In such a system, conquest is no longer just about land or power. It is about rewriting the map into God's image. Submission is not only political, it is theological. The sun burns over the hills of Canaan. From the horizon, a column of dust rises the march of a people carrying what they believe is God's own command. At the center, the Ark of the Covenant glimmers under its gilded covering, swaying on the shoulders of priests. To its bearers, it is not just a relic, it is the physical embodiment of divine will, a promise that this land has been given to them by heaven itself. The ritual begins before the first sword is drawn. Priests blow ram's horns in unison, their calls echoing against the stone walls of Jericho. Day after day they march around the city, the sound of the horns growing heavier, more inevitable. On the seventh day, the procession halts. The shouts rise like a wave, and the walls collapse in a cloud of dust and stone. The army surges in. Steel flashes in the morning light. Warriors cut down guards, still reeling from the shock. Doors are smashed open. Families huddle inside, only to be dragged out into the street. Infants are torn from their mothers' arms. The young are run through with spears. The elderly collapse beneath the weight of falling roofs as torches set homes ablaze. There is no negotiation, no offer of surrender. This is not a battle for submission. It is an eradication. Livestock are slaughtered, fields trampled, wells poisoned with corpses. The smell of burning thatch and charred flesh mixes with the metallic tang of fresh blood. By nightfall, the streets are silent, except for the crackle of flames consuming what remains. The victors do not see massacre. they see obedience. Every life taken, every home destroyed, is an act of worship. Mercy is not just unnecessary, it is forbidden. To spare is to betray the covenant. And this is the logic of the chosen people. If God has promised you the land, those who live on it are trespassers against heaven itself. Their removal is not cruelty. It is justice, as defined by the divine. In such a worldview, annihilation is purification, and the death of the other becomes the measure of your faithfulness. The conquest of Canaan was not simply about territory. It was a ritual cleansing of a promised inheritance. War here was liturgy. The sword was a sacrament. The chamber smells of damp stone and scorched flesh. Torches spit and hiss along the walls, their light catching the steel jaws of the Iron Maiden, the stretching gears of the rack, the dangling ropes of the strappado. In the center, a man kneels, wrists bound, his face pale from months without sunlight. His crime is not murder, not treason. His crime is thought. Heresy, the word that strips away all other charges. It means your mind has wandered beyond the church's fence. And in this world, a thought that defies God is a thought that cannot be allowed to live. The Inquisitor approaches, draped in black, the cross embroidered over his heart. His voice is calm, almost fatherly. Confess and save your soul. The questions begin softly about belief, about loyalty, about whispers to neighbors. Every hesitation, every stumble over a word is taken as proof. And when answers do not align with doctrine, the chamber comes alive. The prisoner is stretched on the rack. Tendons scream, joints tear. The body arches, trying to escape itself. But the worst pain is not in the limbs. It is in the knowledge that there is no correct answer, only the one they want. Faith without obedience is blasphemy, the Inquisitor murmurs, and the screaming continues until the words spill out. A confession shaped by agony, not by truth. Once spoken, the confession seals the verdict. The condemned is paraded through the streets not as a criminal, but as a warning. Bells toll. Priests chant. The pyre is waiting. Flames climb the stake, swallowing hair, skin, breath. The crowd watches, some crossing themselves, others nodding solemnly. In the Inquisition's eyes, this is not execution. This is purification. Here, fire is not the enemy of the soul, it is the cure. And this is the brilliance and the horror of the Inquisition. Violence is never framed as revenge. It is love in its most twisted form, the church claiming to save you, even as it kills you. When belief must be forced, it is no longer belief. It is fear wearing a halo. In the world of the Inquisition, there is no refuge in silence, no safety in ignorance. You can be condemned not for what you've done, but for what you think, or what they think you think. In the eyes of power, the unspoken doubt is already a crime. The sound of chanting rolls over the valley low, rhythmic, calming. Monks sit in golden robes, beneath murals of compassion, their lips moving in silent repetition of the Bodhisattva's vow. May all beings be free from suffering. But just outside the monastery walls, a different reality unfolds. A boy lies tied to a wooden pole. His crime: speaking against the Lama who rules his village. His punishment: public lashing by the monastery's guards. Soldiers trained, not in meditation, but in submission. In feudal Tibet, monasteries were not just centers of prayer. They were the landlords, the judges, the jails. These temples of transcendence commanded armies of armed monks, dabdabs, tasked with collecting taxes, quelling rebellion, and enforcing spiritual law with physical pain. When a prayer is backed by a sword, it stops being a prayer. Peasants worked monastic lands as bonded serfs. They owed not only crops, but loyalty, labor, and obedience. Failure to comply meant beatings, amputations, even being blinded with hot irons. Monks administered justice from thrones carved with dragons, beneath Thangka scrolls that depicted realms of peace. Behind the walls of Lhasa, debates on reincarnation and emptiness echoed through halls lined with gold. But beyond the gates, cries of hunger, revolt, and silence painted a different mandala. A religion that claims to transcend the world must first answer for the one it built. The Tibetan theocracy ruled not only the body but the soul. To question the Lama was to question your karma. To refuse a tax was to deny your past life's sins. Faith became a contract, and your suffering a deserved clause. Dissenters weren't just rebels. They were spiritually wrong. And so, suppression became salvation. When compassion is weaponized, even silence becomes complicity. Western Romanticism would later paint Tibet as a lost paradise, a Shangri-La of peace, untouched by corruption. But buried beneath the snow and silence are bones, scars, and the echo of a truth few dare confront. Even the most beautiful teachings can be twisted by the machinery of rule. It begins with a cry. A Dalit boy, no more than 12, is dragged from the village well. His crime: letting the rope of his bucket touch the water reserved for upper castes. Men surround him, voices sharp with disgust. Someone shaves his head with a rusted blade. Ash and cow dung are smeared into his scalp as the crowd jeers. A rope is tied around his neck, and he is paraded through the streets while the village watches in silence. In the world of caste, humiliation is public because it is meant to teach, and the lesson is always the same: know your place. When oppression wears the crown of divinity, no chain is needed. The mind will lock its own cage. This is not an isolated cruelty. It is the quiet architecture of a system older than memory. Brahmins to pray, Kshatriyas to rule, Vaishyas to trade, Shudras to serve, and beneath them all, outside the sacred order entirely, the Dalits, the untouchables. In the fields, Dalits labor from sunrise until the stars appear. They till soil they will never own, pay taxes to priests whose prayers they cannot join, and offer grain to temples whose doors they cannot enter. If their shadow touches the food of an upper caste, it must be thrown away. If they walk on the wrong road, they can be beaten until they can no longer stand. In the villages, the rules are enforced not just by custom, but by scripture. The Manusmriti decrees: a Shudra who dares to recite the Vedas shall have molten lead poured into his ears. A Dali who wears gold or silk may be whipped for violating the cosmic order. In a society where God writes the law, injustice becomes destiny. And when Dalits dare to resist, the punishment is swift. In 1769, a group of landless laborers in Tamil Nadu refused to work without pay. The village headman ordered a purification. Women were stripped, naked, and driven into the fields. Men were bound, beaten, and forced to eat human waste to cleanse their sin of defiance. Even the smallest rebellions, fetching water from the wrong well, wearing shoes in the wrong street, can end in blood. When your suffering is called karma, every wound becomes proof you deserved it. This is the cruelty of sacred hierarchy. You are told that your pain is not only necessary, it is righteous. That your poverty is the interest on a debt from another life. That your place at the bottom is not oppression, but divine justice. And so, the system survives century after century, not only through force, but through belief. The chains are not just on the wrists, they are in the soul. Temples rise above the villages, their bells ringing with prayers for compassion, even as the faithful step over the bodies of those barred from entering. In this way, the gods bless the order, and the order blesses the gods. When the temple stands on the backs of the lowly, every prayer is a stone in their burden. Laws have changed in the modern world, but in the quiet alleys of rural India, the whispers remain. Know your place. Because the oldest hierarchies are not written in law books, they are carved into the language of the divine. A young man sits cross-legged in front of a black flag, a rifle resting across his knees. He cannot be more than 20. His beard is thin, his hands steady. Behind him, the walls are draped with verses promising paradise to those who fall in the path of God. He smiles once, not the smile of a killer, but the smile of someone convinced he is going home. When you believe death is the door to glory, every step toward it feels like a victory lap. In modern jihadist culture, martyrdom is not an end. It is the highest achievement. Recruits are told their blood will be ink in the story of salvation, that their sacrifice will echo in eternity. They are shown videos of past martyrs, their faces fading into clouds of gold, their names read like saints in a litany. Mothers are filmed draping shawls over their sons' shoulders, whispering prayers into their ears, blessing them for the wedding they are about to attend, the wedding to paradise. Training camps are austere, but purposeful. Young men memorize scripture alongside target practice. They learn not only how to shoot, but how to speak into a camera, to leave behind a final testimony that will inspire others. Death is rehearsed long before it arrives. When martyrdom is rehearsed, dying becomes performance. In the streets, murals appear, overnight faces of the fallen, painted with halos of light, their rifles cradled like holy relics. Children pass by and see heroes, not corpses. Their names are chanted at rallies. Their families are honored with gifts. A son's absence is rewritten as the family's eternal pride. The operation itself is swift. Sometimes it is a bombing, sometimes an armed assault, sometimes a suicide vest hidden beneath a jacket. The target is chosen for maximum spectacle. A marketplace, a school, a place of worship of the other. The blast is both message and baptism, the moment when myth and reality converge. In the aftermath, propaganda channels move quickly. The dead man's image is everywhere within hours. His words are quoted as if they were prophecy. His life is edited into a legend. The awkward boy becomes the fearless warrior. The poor student becomes the lion of God. When the dead are more powerful than the living, the grave becomes the pulpit. This is how modern martyrdom works. It turns death into the most persuasive sermon. It turns a personal choice into a collective destiny. And here is the real danger. Martyrdom culture is not just about killing the enemy. It is about seducing the next generation to follow. In this logic, the body is disposable, but the image is immortal. Every successful martyr is an advertisement for the next. When a culture worships death, every funeral is a recruitment drive. How does a faith built on compassion set villages on fire? How do men who bow before the Buddha aim rifles at women and children? In Myanmar, the answer lies in a word whispered like a curse: Rohingya. When religion and nationalism marry, compassion is the first casualty. In the western state of Rakhine, the Rohingya, a Muslim minority in a Buddhist majority land, had lived for generations. But to many nationalists, they were never truly citizens. They were Bengali intruders, a threat not only to the borders of Myanmar, but to the purity of its Buddhist soul. In 2016, the army moved in. Officially, it was a counter-terrorism operation. On the ground, it was something else entirely. Troops swept into villages at dawn. Houses were doused in fuel and set ablaze while families still slept inside. Men who ran were shot. Those who stayed were beaten. Women were dragged into fields, their screams swallowed by the sound of burning rooftops. Children were flung into the flames. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, and the iron tang of blood. Genocide never begins with bullets. It begins with a story about who doesn't belong. Behind the soldiers came the mob civilians armed with machetes and bamboo poles, chanting Buddhist prayers as they chased down their neighbors. Some carried icons of the Buddha around their necks, a talisman for protection as they burned the homes of the other. The Rohingya fled in waves toward the border with Bangladesh. Entire families waded through rivers under gunfire. Mothers clutched, infants already limp in their arms. The lucky ones reached refugee camps. The rest became part of the silent count beneath the ashes. And yet, in the towns far from the killing fields, the narrative was different. Monks preached about protecting the nation's faith. Politicians spoke of securing the homeland. News outlets repeated the same refrain: "We are defending ourselves." When persecution wears the mask of self-defense, even murder feels righteous. This is the danger when religious identity fuses with national identity. Every outsider becomes an enemy of the state and an enemy of God. Violence is no longer just political. It is sacred duty. In Myanmar, the saffron robe and the army uniform stood side by side. Faith was not merely complicit, it was a co-author of the purge. When you kill in God's name and the nation's name at once, you can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. The Golden Temple Harmandir Sahib rises from the water like a vision. Its walls gleam in the sun, gold leaf catching the morning light, the sacred pool rippling in quiet circles. Pilgrims kneel, touch their foreheads to the marble, and whisper prayers for peace. But in the summer of 1984, the temple was no longer just a place of worship. It was a fortress. Inside, armed militants stockpiled rifles, machine guns, and ammunition. They patrolled the marble walkways barefoot, AK-47s slung over their shoulders, their turbans tight against the wind. Loudspeakers once used for scripture now carried speeches calling for Khalistan, an independent Sikh homeland. When the altar becomes an armory, every prayer echoes with the weight of war. Outside the temple, tension was thick. The Indian government saw the buildup as a direct challenge to the state's authority. The militants saw any interference as an attack on their faith. In this standoff, there was no neutral ground, only loyalty or betrayal. In June 1984, Operation Blue Star began. Tanks and armored carriers rolled into Amritsar under the cover of darkness. The streets emptied, except for soldiers moving in formation. At the temple gates, firefights erupted instantly, bullets sparking against marble, the sacred pool rippling with shockwaves. When a holy place becomes a battlefield, the faith itself bleeds. Inside, defenders fired from temple windows and towers. The air was thick with gunpowder and incense. Civilians, pilgrims who had come to pray, were caught in the crossfire. Some were used as human shields. Others died clutching prayer beads in the chaos. For days, the fighting raged. Grenades echoed through the sanctum. The golden walls were pocked with bullet holes. The sacred pool ran dark, reflecting flames from the surrounding complex. When the guns finally fell silent, hundreds were dead militants, soldiers, and civilians alike. Bodies lay in the shadow of the gilded dome. The temple's marble floors were slick, not with ritual water, but with blood. To claim the holy in war is to risk losing it forever. For the Sikh community, the scars were deep. Many saw the assault as sacrilege, an unforgivable desecration of their holiest site. For the government, it was a necessary strike to prevent secession. But in both narratives, the Golden Temple was no longer untouched. It was marked, militarized, and martyred. In the years that followed, revenge came swiftly. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who had ordered the operation, was assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards. Her death sparked pogroms across India, with thousands of Sikhs killed in mob violence. The cycle of blood had only begun. When the sacred and the armed are one, every bullet is a prayer, and every prayer a threat. We come to bring you salvation. The words fall gently from the lips of the priest as the ship's plank hits the shore. Behind him, soldiers step onto the sand muskets in their hands, steel glinting in the sun. The cross rises high on the beach, planted into the earth like a new flag. When the cross and the sword land together, the sermon is never just about God. For the indigenous people, the strangers bring strange gifts: beads, mirrors, bright cloth. But the gifts come with a message: abandon your gods, your language, your way of life. Accept the new faith, and you may live in peace under the king's protection. Refuse, and the protection will come in another form. Villages that resist are met with fire. Homes are torched, crops trampled under boots. Warriors armed with spears fall to gunfire they have never heard before. Women are taken as concubines or servants. Children are baptized in rivers, still red with their parents' blood. Missionaries follow the soldiers closely. They preach of heaven and hell in languages no one understands, translate only what suits their purpose, and rewrite history so that the coming of the cross seems inevitable, even merciful. It is easier to conquer a people's soul than their land, and far more permanent. In the Americas, entire nations vanish within a generation. In Africa, tribal boundaries are erased, redrawn to serve distant crowns. In Oceania, island cultures are folded into the empire's ledger like assets in an account. Disease rides with the conqueror's smallpox, measles wiping out millions before swords even rise. Those who survive are gathered into missions or reservations, stripped of their names, their stories, their gods. The colonizers call it civilizing. They record the destruction as pacification, the theft as development, the enslavement as conversion. When conquest calls itself civilization, even the graves are counted as progress. And yet, in the halls of Europe, the explorers are celebrated. Gold and silver flow back to the capitals, along with exotic plants, strange animals, and human beings displayed as curiosities. The Church hails the expansion as proof of divine favor. Kings and queens commission new voyages, hungry for souls and silver alike. In time, the conquered forget that their grandparents once prayed to different gods. Their languages fade. Their songs are sung only in whispers. The new faith becomes the only faith, and the story of its arrival becomes the story of their beginning. The most complete conquest is the one the conquered call their salvation. Religious violence is not an accident. It is the shadow cast by the very structure of religious power. Carl Jung called it the collective shadow, the part of the psyche that holds everything we refuse to see in ourselves. For individuals, it is hidden rage, envy, fear. For religions, it is the hunger for control, the fear of heresy, the will to dominate. On the surface, faith promises absolute love and goodness, but no system that claims to hold absolute truth can remain free of its shadow. The more a creed insists on its purity, the more violently it will reject anything that threatens it. The brighter the halo, the darker the shadow it casts. Every crusade, every inquisition, every massacre in the name of God, they are not anomalies. They are eruptions of what the system hides from itself. Jung warned that what we repress will return, but in distorted, destructive form. When a religion denies its own capacity for cruelty, it projects that cruelty outward. The unbeliever becomes the embodiment of evil. The heretic becomes the cancer in the body of the faithful. And so, violence is framed not as hatred, but as healing. What the creed cannot face in itself, it will burn in someone else. This is why religious violence often feels righteous to those who commit it. They are not killing a person. They are erasing the shadow they refuse to see within. But shadows cannot be destroyed this way. Every burning body, every shattered village, only deepens the darkness, because it confirms the lie that the evil was out there all along. The truth is harder and far more dangerous. The shadow is inside the faith itself. It is born the moment a belief declares itself the only truth worth living or dying for. The enemy we fear is often the reflection we cannot bear to see. Until religions learn to confront their own shadows, they will keep hunting them in the world outside. And every time they do, history will add another chapter to the book of holy violence. And yet, history is never made of darkness alone. Even in the bloodiest chapters, religion gave birth to cathedrals whose spires pierce the sky, to temples that glow like sunrise in stone. It shaped philosophies that still guide our moral compass. It wove the very fabric of law, order, and shared identity. Faith inspired music that can bring tears to your eyes. It carved meaning into the chaos of life. It built communities where the lonely found belonging and the grieving found hope. The same hands that blessed the sword also painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. So the question is not whether religion is good or evil. The question is, can we face its shadow without turning away from its light? Can we look at the violence, the hypocrisy, the corruption, and still see the wisdom that survives beneath it? To erase the darkness is easy. To hold the darkness and the light in the same hand, that is the real work. If we cannot confront both, we will keep living in cycles, worshiping the beauty denying the brutality until the brutality returns. Which moment in this history shocked you the most? Was it the Crusaders marching under the cross, or the monks blessing soldiers in the snow? The prayers whispered over burning villages, or the silence of those who looked away? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want to explore what still lies hidden, join me for the next chapter. The 10 greatest unsolved secrets of world religions, where faith's deepest mysteries wait in the shadows, because history's darkest truths are only the beginning.